بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. In our last lesson we were speaking about حكم العادي, and we mentioned a few examples. Inshallah ta'ala, today we will enter into the next part where the author speaks about Hukmul Aqli. And inshallah ta'ala, we will understand the difference between Hukmul Adi and Hukmul Aqli. So last week I mentioned that Hukmul Adi, which I translate as the empirical laws, we mentioned that empirical laws is based on repetition and observation. Empirical laws is based on repetition and observation. So the example of fire burning, this is one of the examples we gave that based on our experience and our observation that fire burns. So we come into that conclusion that this combustion is existence with the existence of fire. So likewise when comes to hunger to food, and likewise quenching of thirst to drinking of water. So there are a few other things I believe the author mentioned after this. He gave some examples. We will go through those examples inshallah ta'ala, and then we will continue from there inshallah. So let us go back into our notes. So as you can see here, we have covered Hukm Shari. All this we have covered. This is where we mentioned in our class last week. I cannot remember exactly where we stopped, but I think we have covered the four categories, right? I mentioned about this definition, and then we mentioned about wa'aqsamuhu arba'a, the four categories. Can anyone remind?
Yes, Ustaz, we haven't gone through the four categories yet.
We have not gone through the four categories yet. Okay. Let us go back into the definition of the empirical laws. So the empirical laws, we just go through this one time inshallah. The author mentioned وَأَمَّا الْحُكْمُ الْعَادِي فَهُوَ إِثْبَاتُ رَبْطِ بَيْنَ أَمْرٍ وَأَمْرٍ وُجُودًا وَعَدَمًا. So here, when you look at the definition, the author speaks about the connection between the cause and the effect. There is a connection between the cause and the effect. So whenever you have a cause, you have the effect. So when there is no cause, there is no effect. So this basically what he is saying. وَإِثْبَاتُ رَبْطِ بَيْنَ أَمْرٍ وَأَمْرٍ وُجُودًا وَعَدَمًا بِوَاسِطَةِ التَّكَرُّرِ. So after repetition, that a particular cause and it has a particular effect. After some repetition, we come into the conclusion of the occurrence of this particular thing. مع صحة التخلف, but at the same time there is a possibility that it does not occur. There is a possibility that a person eat medicine, he does not cure, but usually it cures. So even after many repetitions that a person is used to a particular medicine when he is sick, but there is also a possibility in the future the same medicine and it might not cure him. How does he come into this conclusion that this particular medicine and it cures him? Because of the repetition and because of experience. So this is basically the meaning of Hukmul Adi. So Hukmul Adi, remember this, Hukmul Adi is based on repetition. And this is where the knowledge of physics and science, physics and chemistry, evolve. physics and chemistry evolved in experimentation, and likewise repetition. Then he mentioned ma'asihati takhallufi wa adamu ta'thiri ahadihima fil akhari batta. So there is no efficacy, and this is also important, and this is where our belief in Islam, the aqidah comes in, and we mention that there is no efficacy of the cause to cause the effect. There is no efficacy. Efficacy is a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not the asbab. So when we say a person is sick and he eats Panadol, for example, when he is having flu, and he eats any Panadol, and he get cured after that. So it is not the Panadol that gives the effect of cure, but it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that gives the effect of cure when consuming any Panadol. So this is when what in man we say that the cause does not have any efficacy to create the effect. To create the effect. So these are merely means which is created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The means is a creation of Allah. The effect is also a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So likewise we can speak about a lot of things, a lot of examples. Part of it we mentioned in last week, when a person is hungry, he consumes food and he becomes full. When a person is thirsty, he drinks water and he becomes quench. So it is not the food that cures him, it is not the water that quench him, but it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the point of eating and at the point of drinking. So I make this translation. As for the empirical laws, it is the affirmation or establishment of a binding factor between a ruling, a cause to another, the effect, both in its existence and non-existence. This happens by the means of repetition and with the possibility of its non-occurrence. The possibility of its non-occurrence. So the occurrence is possible, not something that is necessary. It is a possible kind of occurrence. This happens by the means of repetition and with the possibility of its non-occurrence, without one having the efficacy over the other at all. So this is basically the definition of hukmul adi, the empirical laws. So I hope it is clear, inshallah ta'ala. Later on we will enter into the rational laws, which there is a lot of difference between empirical laws and rational laws. And this is the point that you all have to pay attention, because so many of these arguments they are delicate and fine. Having misunderstanding regarding the differences between empirical laws and rational laws can end up in serious issues. So I hope, inshallah ta'ala, we can understand this well, inshallah. And then the author give the 4 categories. So now we go through the 4 categories. So there are 4 categories, and he said, number 1, he said, Rabatu wujudin bi wujud. The binding of an existent thing to another. Something that is in existence. Like the binding of fullness to the existence of eating. So now you have eating, the act of eating, and becoming full. The act of eating and becoming full. So when you eat, you become full. So with the existence of eating, then comes the existence of fullness. Clear, inshallah. This is the meaning of Rabatu wujudin bi wujud. Binding of an existent thing to another existent thing. So I hope it is clear, inshallah. I will just go through. If there is any questions later on, you can ask. If there is anything that is not clear. Wa rabatu adamin bi adam. This is the opposite. The binding of a non-existent thing to another. The binding of a non-existent thing to another non-existent thing. Like the binding of hunger to the non-existence of eating. So this is the opposite. So without any eating, there is no fullness. Without any eating, there is no any fullness. Clear, inshallah. So this is an example, and he will say, Rabatu adamin bi adamin. Binding of the non-existent and the non-existent. So without the consumption of food, of food, there is no fullness. There is no fullness. This is the second one. So he said, وَرَبْطُ عَدَمٍ بِعَدَمٍ كَرَبْطِ عَدَمِ الشِّبَعِ بِعَدَمِ الْأَقْلِ. No fullness without the consumption any of food. The third one, وَرَبْطُ وُجُودٍ بِعَدَمٍ, the binding of an existent thing to a non-existent thing. كَرَبْطِ وُجُودِ الْجُوعِ بِعَدَمِ الْأَكْلِ, like the binding of the existence of hunger to the non-existent any of eating. So we say hunger is in existence. Hunger is in existence. Why? We bind it any with not eating. So we are binding something that is in existence with something that is non-existent. So the existence any of hunger comes together with the non-existence any of eating. This is the meaning of rabti wujudin bi adam. Yani we bind an existent thing to a non-existent thing. Wa rabtu adamin bi wujud. The opposite yani is the binding of a non-existent thing to an existent thing. The binding any of a non-existent thing to an existent thing. Like the binding of the non-existence any of hunger to the existence of eating. The binding any of non-existence of hunger to the existence any of eating. So when there is eating, hunger becomes non-existence. So when there is eating, hunger becomes non-existent. So the non-existence any of hunger entails the existence of eating. Clear inshallah? طيب. So these are the four categories. The four categories any of the empirical laws. How any we speak any about this connection any between the cause any and the effect. So sometimes any both any causes and effect any are in existence. Sometimes they are both of them are not in existence. Sometimes any one is in existence, the other is not in existence, and the opposite. So now when we speak any about hukmul aqli. So this is the part any we have to pay any attention. Inshallah, any if you have any questions, any later on any we take in questions. So now when we look any at this definition, the author any mentioned wa ammal hukmul aqli. Wa ammal hukmul aqli fahuwa isbatu amrin aw nafyuhu. Isbatu amrin aw nafyuhu min ghairi tawaqqufin ala takarrurin wala wad'i wadi'in. So I make any this translation, and as for the rational laws, So before any I speak any about this definition, we mentioned that in the empirical laws that it depends any on repetition and observation and experimentation. So this is the parable any of the knowledge of physics and chemistry. We mentioned this, and some other any sciences. When it comes into rational laws, it is not dependent on repetition. It is not any dependent on experimentation and observation. So remember this, whenever we speak any about ahkamul aql, about rational laws, we are not any speaking any about something any that we are based on, that we base on observation and experimentation. Rational laws any are something that are established rationally. Some things any that are established rationally and they cannot change. Something that are established and rationally, when we say established and rationally, meaning it is not any established based on repetition. It is established rationally. So, for example, we say that the three sides any of the triangle make up 180 degrees. This is within rational law. This is not any based any on experimentation. Meaning you can come out with any form of triangle. You can come up with any form of triangle. Any form of triangle that you can construct. The measurement will be 180 degrees. The measurement will be 180 degrees. And this we are not in need any of experimentation and observation. This is something that is established rationally. There is something established rationally, and it is not any dependent on repetition. So this is the difference between rational laws and empirical laws. Empirical laws are dependent on repetition. So how you establish that fire burns Yani is by experimentation and observation and repetition, then you come to the conclusion. But when it comes into the rational laws, and we are not in need of this process. So maybe the comparison, as what I mentioned in last week, the comparison is with regard to mathematics and chemistry. Mathematics any are based on rational laws. Mathematics any are based on rational laws. Any 2 plus 2 any is always any 4. So we are not any in need any of experimentation and observation. Because these are rational laws. These laws any cannot change. These laws any they cannot change. So what you call it, mathematics are more related tak, Ana dah post kat dalam orang punya group. Ana tak tahu ini dia belum masuk lagi. Oh, last me, hantar punya last me. Bukan sekarang. Last me. Itu ya, Ana kena check year 3 perempuan. Tak apa. Nanti Ana akan hantar. Okay. Apa nak?
with regard to substances, for example, or cognitively like the necessity attribute of eternity of our Lord. So, when it comes to substances and the ethical space, and we say this is necessary. This is necessary. Can you imagine a substance that does not take up space? Impossible. So, whenever we say an object of substance or a body, it must take up space. It must take up space. And the nature of substances in itself is that it is taking up space. So this is within the rational law. So we say this is wajib in aqli. It is, we cannot imagine a substance without any the taking up any of space. So this is based on simple knowledge. We say based on daruri. Based on daruri, meaning we are not in need to ponder upon this reality. Do you need to ponder that your body takes up space? This comes naturally. Imagine, for example, you enter into a room. And you see in the room full of people. Will you enter into the room? You will not enter the room because you know that all spaces have been taken up. Likewise, when you want to board the train, you find that the train is full of people. So when you see that there is no space, you do not enter. And this comes naturally. Substances and bodies, when they take up space. So we are not in need to ponder upon this reality because this is something that we are observing all the time. This is something that we see all the time. So this is a form, this is an example in the author mentioned. It is wajib aqli, that the mind cannot conceive its non-existence. Every single object and body or substance, it takes up space. And this is based on daruri, meaning you are not in need to ponder further. Tamam? So this is the first part. Number two, we get an example of the pre-eternity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-qidam. So we said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no beginning. This is wajib aqli. Wajib aqli. This is based on necessity. The loss, we said loss of rationality. We said this is necessary. That God cannot have a beginning. If God has a beginning, then He is a creation, and that is impossible. God and it cannot become a creation at the same time. Because it can lead into infinite regression. So this is not So remember this when we speak about mustahil, we say something that cannot exist. That the mind cannot conceive any its existence. So again, it is divided into two parts. One is the darura, the other one is nadar. The daruri, in another words, we say daruri and nadari. So daruri, again, it is something that does not require ponderance. Nadari is something that requires any ponderance. So let us look at what the author gave as the example. He said, imma daruratan ta'awil jirmi an al-harakati was-sukun. This is an example again about substances. Imagine a substance like my body, like our bodies. For example, we say our bodies does not move or be still. Now this is impossible. Can we say that? Yani our bodies does not any what we call it accept any movement or non-movement. Can you imagine any of the substance in our body that does not move and also that moves? Impossible, correct? So a body either it moves or it does not move. But to reject both movement and non-movement with regard to a body or a substance, this is mustahil aqlan. Mustahil aqlan. It cannot be in existence. Cannot be in existence. Likewise, we give the example of a body moving and not moving at the same time. Mustahil. So either it is moving or it is not moving. So we cannot be saying that it happens at the same time, and we cannot be rejecting any both by saying that it does not move, and it also what we call it, it does not any move and what we call it, does not is both not moving and also not any in stillness. So inshallah, this is an we say mustahil aqlan, but it's based on the daruri, because we are not in need to ponder upon any this reality. And then when it comes to the nadari, he said, wa imma nadaran kashariki li maulana jalla wa azza. When it comes to nadari, yani knowledge that we require for us to ponder upon its reality, he gave an example ascribing a partner to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by saying that it is another God, na'udzubillah min dhalik, to Allah. So this is a mustahil aqlan, but this is not daruri, because why? People, for example, they are in need to digest some information. Yani how do you prove that having any more than one God is impossible rationally? Yani you have to come out with the argument of burhanu tamanno. Last time we spoke about burhanu tamanno. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned law kana fihima alihatun illa Allah lafasadatta. Yani if God is more than one, then you will find chaos in the heavens and the earth. There will be a question of power. So all these things require any confidence. So this is the example of yani mustahil aqli based on nadari. So in your notes, when it comes to the point of rational laws, so under necessity, please take note. Under necessity, we have daruri and we have nadari. If I'm not mistaken, the English translation will be simple knowledge and cognitive knowledge. Simple knowledge and cognitive. When it comes to nadari, yani nadari, when it's cognitive, it requires any ponderance, right? Correct or not? And some of you are familiar with some of these terms, might know. Likewise, when it comes to the mustahil, when it comes to the impossibility, it is divided into daruri and nadari. Likewise. And then he speaks about the possible. Wal jaiz.
The possible. Jaiz aqli. Ma yasihu fil aqli wujuduhu wa adamu. So when it comes into the possible, any the mind can conceive the non-existence and the existence, and both can be conceived by the mind. This is jais, possible. And likewise, it is divided into two categories. Imma daruratan. Number one is darurah. The other one is nadari. So one is daruri, one is nadari. So what is the example he gave? He said, Kal harakati lana. Kal harakati lana. Yani like our movement. Like our movement. So our movement is possible. Our movement is possible. This is based on daruri. Wa imma nadaran ka ta'dibil muti' wa ithabatil asi. And when comes to nadari, like the punishment of the one who is obedient to Allah. And rewards for the disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning, is it possible that a person who is disobedient to Allah, meaning he commits a lot of sin, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive him? Yes, possible. Even though he commit a lot of sin. Is it possible that a person who obeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and make ibadah and remembers Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah punish him in hellfire? Is it possible? Yes, it's possible. So nothing is made obligatory upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah can punish an obedient slave, and also Allah can give the rewards of a disobedient slave. So we say this is jais aqli, and this is based on nadari. Nadari, and it requires some ponderance. And if we say that Allah is not forced, the notion when you say Allah is not forced, these things can happen. So these are the two categories of we say daruri and nadari. So daruri like we mentioned our movement, that we are human beings, that movements for us is possible. So this jais al-aqli. So we have covered the three categories of the rational laws: necessary, impossible, and possible. And then after that he mentioned wal madhahibu fil af'ali thalatha. Now he is going to speak about the actions of human beings. The actions of human beings. All this we have covered in Kharida, but this muqaddimat of Imam Sanusi is more in detail. I will take in questions if there is any questions. Is there any questions so far on what I mentioned? Everything is good? I hope all of you can understand. No problem, Many of these things you have studied actually, but these definitions are important for you to keep. So whenever you study Aqidah, this will be at the back end of your mind, all these definitions. If there is no question, maybe we just go through. We got a few more minutes. Now the author is going to speak about the school of thought when it comes to the actions of human beings. So he said there are three. Wal madahib, there are three schools of thought. Number one, he said the infinite regress has no argument. No, yes, it has an argument. The infinite regression has the argument. The argument of Burhan Utama, the argument of the impossibility of infinite regression. We have that argument. Infinite regression is impossible. Rationally, it is impossible. But it requires what? It requires ponderance. It requires study. To study that infinite regression is impossible, this is nadari, this is cognitive, meaning you are in need to ponder. It is not something that comes naturally, because there are people, for example, they believe in infinite regression. So for example, they believe in a God that has a beginning, but they fail to see that if that is so, then there is another God that brought this God into existence. So people do not see this coming. So they just believe for the sake of belief. Whenever we say, for example, something has a beginning, there is an originator. So if God has a beginning, he cannot become God. Simple as that. If God has a beginning, he cannot become God. Then we have to ask, who is the one who created him? So this example we gave, God A created God B, God B created God C, God C created God D, God D created God E, never ending. This is impossible. Never ending any is. Never ending any in this way any is any impossible. طيب. Then we mention now we go to this the three schools of thought. Number one, and he say Madhabul Jabriya. Jabriya is a school of thought and that believes that human beings got no choices. And human beings can all of the actions of human beings are a creation, and human beings got no choice. So this belief is just the belief then human beings I like robots. They got no choice. This is the school of thought of the Jabriya. And then we have Qadariya. Qadariya is the opposite. They believe that human beings has a choice, and human beings can create their own actions. And then we have the Ahlul Sunnah. The Ahlul Sunnah says that human beings has a choice, but the actions of human beings are a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the mazhab of Ahlul Sunnah is in between the mazhab of Jabriya and the mazhab of Qadariya. So this is just a summary, inshallah ta'ala. Next week we will speak more about this. Please write in your attendance. We will stop here. Jazakumullah khair.